All right. Hey, everybody. Now we're formally getting started. We've been warming up for the time before here. We've got Wayne here from Northern Colorado and not very far. Oh, wow. It's weird because I rarely get to say I'm the only one from Northern Colorado. But today I got my two friends, Joe and Song. Joe's in the middle on my screen at least. Song's over on the left, and sometimes you guys will see them on the left of your screen or right, whatever, depends on where you're looking. If you're on a phone, you might have to actually move your fingers across, and that will move from the presentation to the webcams. So go back and forth that way. Some of you have just called in. That's cool. I'm going to get a little bit of logistics, and then we're going to get going. If you've got questions, there's a little box. It's probably over on the right that you can just throw your questions into anytime you want, questions or comments. At the very end, we'll also allow you to raise your hand, and there's a little button you can click. And if you'd like to unmute yourself, we can let you talk and ask these guys questions live, or you can get some opinions and thoughts. But then most of you are probably going to be shy. I know that because we've done thousands of these. And you're not going to want to say anything, but you can type. And then if you type in a question, we'll just ask it for you. And so you'll be able to interact with Joe and Song that way. The reason this is very cool for me today, and I'm going to stop right after this and let Joe and Song introduce themselves, is it's very rare that we do something as technical, scientifically technical as this is going to be today. Most of the time, we talk sort of big picture about things. But this is going to probably get a little bit heavy duty today. So I don't mean that in a negative way. That's a real positive. I know we've invited a number of professors on here today, and I hope some of you are out there. I hope some of you can take the value you get from this and put it into your classrooms. I know there are some other business people out there that might want to look at the technologies that Joe and Song are going to talk about and use them on the sites that you manage. So one of the reasons that we ask these guys on is we are right now in the process of getting Song and Joe engaged in doing what they're going to talk about today on one of the sites that we have back in Ohio. And Joe, a bunch of my staff from Ohio are on, so it's cool to have them on with us. And there might be some folks from the US EPA on. And we welcome you, as we do to everyone else. And for sure, we know they're going to be listening to replays because I've already talked to a number of them. And it is late back in Chicago where they're at. And I think I'll stop at this point. I'm going to probably just ask them a few questions after they introduce themselves for about 10 minutes. And then they're going to do a presentation, and then we'll do questions at the end. So that's our format. So why don't I start with Song? And Song, why don't you introduce yourself? Just talk a little bit about your personal situation and your business situation, and then how you interact with Joe, and then we'll turn it to Joe.
All right. Hi, everybody. Song Jin. My name is just pronounced as it spells, S-O-N-G. And I was born and I grew up in China. I came to the United States for graduate school. That was in old days, early 90s. And did my degree here, and then started working in the environmental field. And in 2009, I started my company, Advanced Environmental Technologies. I think that's the background website you're looking at right now. And basically to focus on implementing the technologies we have developed to solve real world problems. And I'm married. My wife, she's working for a hospital as a med tech, so she's considered essential during this special time. So she works every day or routine shifts. And I have two kids. One already grown up, moved out of the house. The other one stays with us. He's in high school right now. You probably saw some books in the background, and that's not mine, that's his. He's occupying my office right now. And Joe, got to know Joe in like about maybe a year ago. And
yeah, I could do it. Joe Aiken, and I'm I've been doing environmental cleanup and environmental consulting for about 40 years now. So, in about 20 of those, I've worked with Wayne. So Wayne and I have a good working experience together. Anyway, I was introduced to song because the regulators here in Colorado thought that his technology, the e-redox that we're going to talk about, was so exciting. They said, you need to get a hold of this guy because you're both in Fort Collins, and Song and I have been out working on putting applications together and promoting the technology. Like Song, I'm married. My wife's a school teacher, and she's now teaching from home. So she's really used to doing this webinar thing with lots of kids, and it's a little bit chaotic because all the kids are, one can't hear, the other one can't see, and so it's a little bit of chaos, but she's doing fine. And I've got two kids. Kevin's living with us here. He's finishing up law school, and then Sarah is living in LA, but she's a very independent person, so she's doing fine. Okay.
Wayne, we cannot hear you. Hello, Wayne. I think your microphone.
I had muted myself. Sorry about that, Mark. Thanks. I think you underestimated it, Joe. I think we met in '97, so
Yeah.
That would be 23 years, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's a little longer. But not unfortunate. Joe's been amazing. We've greatly enjoyed, at least I have. I've enjoyed everything we've ever done. He's a fun guy. He's getting a little shy today. We might draw him out of himself as we get going here and get him to give us a little more of the light side of Joe. The beard, by the way, is new. I haven't seen that before. So is that COVID related, or is this just something you're going to do for a while?
It's the coronavirus. I'm not shaving until the coronavirus is done. I hope I don't have a really long beard.
All right, I'm going to ask a couple personal questions, and you guys point to each other, whoever you want to ask it, and if you both point to the other guy, then it's my turn. I can break the tie and see who's going to answer, because they're kind of fun questions. So this one, I actually like both of you to answer. Tell us about a tool that you've used in the last less than a week, okay? That's just cool, and it could be a hand tool, it could be a computer tool, it could be a science-related tool, something you've used that you could briefly tell the audience about that they might see some value in also. Start with you, Joe.
Cool. Well, because I've been home and I've got some hobbies, I've been using some sculpting tools. Does that count? Do the sculpting tools count?
That counts.
Yeah, because
sculptor. Yes, that's very cool.
What am I sculpting? Actually, I got an example here. Here's one of the sculptures that I was doing. That's a sculpture of a fish, and then here you can actually see the tools in action. And this is I'm sculpting, and I'm going to make a cast of this, and then we'll be able to make fossils. That's the ichthyosaur fossil. So yeah, my sculpting tools have come in very handy during our lock-in. So it's been pretty good.
Cool.
That work for you?
Song, you. Yep. Oh, that's great. Song, how about you?
During the past week, I think I did something that's related to Joe. Joe is, other than this business relationship, he's a friend, and I know that he's an artist. He just shows you part of his arts. He's also, he wrote a poem. And Joe was nice enough to share that with me. And so I was using a tool. It's I guess a lot of the audience might know that. I use GarageBand. And I make some music for myself. I wrote a few songs. And so I was using Joe's poem, and my daughter helped me try to turn that into a song lyrics. And then I was trying to compose a song. So I was playing with that. So that I found, the GarageBand. I'm far from computer world. I'm pretty bad in those computer applications, but I still found the GarageBand is pretty easy to use, and love it.
Cool.
I can't show you that because it's not.
No, I was shocked that Joe had what he had there because I didn't prep you guys on these questions at all.
Joe, can I spoil that a little bit? Just the title of it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's Joe's
if
pick.
If it's fine with him.
Gravity wave. Gravity wave. I like that term.
Yeah, I like it too. A couple more, and then we're going to go to your presentation. By the way, the audience is being way too quiet. You guys put something in the question. Put where you're at in the country in the question box. So the world, where you're at in the world. Just put it into the Q&A box. Okay, here's the next one. This is one where you can point a finger at each other. Who wants to tell us about a person in your life before college that's not in your family that had a big influence on you, and that you would just tell us a little bit about and why they had that.
Okay, there goes the song.
You're pointing to Wayne.
I'm pointing to Wayne.
You.
There we go.
Not me.
Okay, well, I'll start. Wayne, what was your question again? Before college, right? Outside of the family.
Yeah, a person that had a big influence on you. Yeah. Other than family.
Other than family. Well, I can. I remember his first name. His first name is Joseph. It's kind of strange. I met him when I was 6 years old, and he, for some reason, I still couldn't figure out. His name is Joseph. That's the American name. He's a Chinese American, but he was in China during the time. That was old days when I was 6 years old. My dad became a friend with this Joseph, and so my dad was forcing me to go to visit him every week to study a different language, English at the time.
Huh.
So I started my English study for 1 year with this Joseph guy when I was 6 years old. And the funny thing is, the first time, I went over there, knock on the door, he opened the door. So instead of ni hao, which is a Chinese hello, he said hello. And I said, hello. I didn't know what hello meant. And then from then on, he never spoke a single Chinese word to me during that whole year. And forced me to recite all the texts, all the textbooks he assigned to me. And also I was watching movies. That was the first time I watched movies in somebody's houses. And it was also the first time I saw some color pictures of his family in LA. And that really helped me. Just 1 year of that English study, I think it benefited me for my whole life.
Wow, that's great. How many languages do you speak, son?
2. A little bit of German.
Okay. Joe, I'm going to point the finger at you. I bet you've got somebody. So tell me about somebody in that New Jersey time frame that impacted you.
Yeah, I mean, the guy, he still impacts my life. I have an Uncle Jim, and he is my mom's brother. And when I was about Song's age, when I was 6, he was ordained as a Catholic priest. And he's a very interesting guy. He's an expert on Native American spirituality. And his job was basically ministering to priests and nuns and renewing their faith and that type of thing. But he's a super interesting guy, and he has very broad thoughts on religion and spirituality and all that kind of stuff, and he's been a pretty big influence on me.
Okay. Last question. This one's a little bit of a toughie, and if you don't want to answer it, please just say so, because again, I didn't warn these guys about anything, but there's 2 of you. So again, first one to point a finger is the other guy's got to answer it first if they choose to. Tell us about no, not yet. You don't even hear, you haven't even heard it yet. Tell us about something that's happened in your life that at the time was really negative. And when you now look back on it, you see that it actually has a really positive outcome on your life now. Joe's thinking, I can see from his eyes.
All right,
Go ahead, Joe. You're about to open your mouth.
I was going to say that I was with a company in the 90s when you and I first met. And that company, we basically had a situation where the stockholders were burnt out. The stockholders were voted out. And so I lost a bit of money. But it opened up a path that I went down when I met you, and I went down that path, and the rest of my career really unfolded nicely, mainly because of that, rather as opposed to it, that kind of thing.
How about you, Sam?
Well, I think along the same line. At the time, I was working for a research organization. And it was a federal agency, but so they carried a lot of mindset of like a federal agency in a bad way. And so I was really disappointed because I was doing a lot of technology development, and everything ended up as either a paper that's published or a patent that's put on the shelf. So I was kind of frustrated. Even, my work was fine. I loved my team and everything. And so I started to think about doing something different. And then this advanced environmental technology idea came into the picture. And at the starting point of that, it was pretty challenging. I guess that's the right word to use at this time. But looking back, getting out of a kind of a secure job and then try to do something by yourself and try to implement the technology that can do a little bit of contribution to the world. And I think I made the right choice. And so it's totally a negative situation turning positive.
Cool. All right, well, I'm gonna now turn it over to you guys. Thanks for those questions. Some of those are not easy, and again, they weren't prepped for any of them. I turn it over to the two of them. They probably work out amongst themselves as who's going to speak when. I think Areed is going to help with their slides a little. Mark might be helping with a video. I'm just going to point out, because it's here, these aren't just papers, but go back to that last one real quick, Mark. I'm sorry. And we're now on the presentation. Just go back to the web page real quick, Mark, if you could. There. Notice we've got Jen in that first paper. We have Jen in the second paper. We have Jen in the third. I would say probably all, as I was going down here. Not just this guy being an expert, but he is one of the experts. So anyway, very cool. So let's go to the presentation now. I'm going to actually pause my webcam so I'm not distracting here. And take it over, guys. And please, everybody, nobody's put any questions in yet. Put some in once these guys get started.
Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to start this thing off. And maybe you can we're going to talk today about advanced environmental technologies. We're going to look at two of the technologies, one in real depth, and then we'll talk about the other one. So the e-redox for contaminant remediation, we're going to talk in depth about that and get kind of technical. Song's going to get technical on us. And then we're going to talk about a lignite-based organic fertilizer, which is both of these technologies are game changers. So can we go to the next slide? Yeah, so we already introduced ourselves, but Song was too modest. So he has over 30 U.S. patents. U.S. and international patents, including the e-redox and the BGF, which is we'll talk about a little bit more. He's been involved in 20 full-scale applications of e-redox technology. So that's going to be, it's important because it's a relatively new technology, but it's not new. It is proven. We'll show you some data from that. for myself, I only have one patent, but it was in 1990, and it was one of the first patents for reductive dechlorination of chlorinated solvents. And we applied technologies at a number of projects, including a very large Lowry Air Force Base project. But I've done dry cleaners, gas stations, landfills, and a lot of other properties too. So let's go to the next one. As far as, next slide, please. As far as advanced environmental technologies goes, Song formed Advanced Environmental Technologies in 2009 here in Fort Collins. The company itself is a technology innovator and a technical services provider. And let's see, Song is a problem solver, and he looks at what the problems are and he goes to fix them. He follows a team approach, and so that's really how I got involved, because I also follow a team approach. We bring in the technology, we bring in the services to solve a problem, and we get the job done. He has, what we're going to do is, when we look at this, I already said we had 20 field application of e-redox, but we also in the soil fertilizer, we have a facility that's in China that is 500,000 metric tons a year. So it's a full-scale system. So you'll see that these technologies are not totally new, but they have lots of potential in the marketplace. Well, let's go to the next one. Yeah, so we're going to get into e-redox, and we're going to go kind of fast because there's a lot of information. So if it seems like I'm going quickly, that's kind of the reason. And it's like, what's unique about e-redox? E-redox is an electrical approach to remediation. It's a low energy electrical approach. You could plug it into the wall. Doesn't use very high power, and it's just really setting up a static electric field. And one of the things it does that's really unique is it stimulates an abiotic reactions in the subsurface. And what happens is, in any kind of remediation, you have multiple reactions that are occurring, and you might want to help one along. So if you wanted to, for example, stimulate bioremediation, you would inject an oil or maybe some sugars, something like that, to help the bioremediation along. Well, when you use e-redox, it stimulates abiotic reactions. They're just chemical reactions that are occurring, and they are not occurring at a very big rate because there are not enough electrons. But when you use e-redox, you take something that's a minor technology, and you break it out and you make it into a major fate mechanism. So it also stimulates biological. So when you turn the e-redox on, you're getting the abiotic and the biotic are now working in synergy. Another thing, Wayne mentioned the project that we're looking at for him. And in that project, there's an existing pump and treat system that's going to take a very long time, because pump and treat systems historically have taken very long time to do a cleanup. But we're going to basically look at using e-redox, because e-redox also, besides from the degradation that's occurring, it also desorbs. It changes the surface chemistry of the particles of the soil grains, and it releases material into the liquid phase, where it can be destroyed or it can be taken to a pump and treat system. It'll be transported in the subsurface, and we'll be moving mass faster, and we'll be able to get the cleanup done more efficiently and cleaner and quicker. And then the best thing about it is it works where other technologies fail, because one of the main thing about other technologies, delivering a chemical or delivering a substrate to bacteria, and trying to deliver that in a silt and a clay is very difficult. If you're in a sandy aquifer, remediation is relatively simple, but the difficult remediations all happen in the silts and clays. And because this is an electrical field that's being set up, clays are typically more conductive, and therefore it's a better place for this technology to work. And so then, in terms of being a game changer and something that's going to make a big impact on the marketplace, this technology, because it works where others don't, is going to find its way into great use. Next slide we're going to do is talk a little bit more about the e-redox here. And I'm going to turn it over to Song, because now he's going to go down the technical path.
Okay, well, thanks, Joe, for that the background. And yeah, as Joe said, the e-redox, I think the unique feature for this technology is that the e-redox, by the way, is just a trademark. So it's based on what's called a bioelectrochemical theory, and that's a niche of science that's kind of started in, I would say, mid 90s. And people at the time were trying to combine different science from different disciplines and so build new applications of them. And in this case, so we are combining microbiology with electrochemistry. So it turned to be a new word called bioelectrochemistry. And e-redox here, the key word is E. Of course, it's electrons. And because now this technology is built on the transport of electrons. So we're not really limited by the physical restrictions. Like if you want to inject things into the ground, in this case for soil and groundwater treatment or remediation, things have to be in contact. So whatever you put in there have to be in contact with contaminants to destruct these contaminants. So the e-redox is relying on electron transfer, so it's different. And we have two groups of that, and we name them e-redox O and e-redox I. And this O and I, they're based on the directions of electron flow. So O is going out, I is coming in. So when electrons are flowing out of contaminants, so we go to chemistry 101, and so if you have electrons coming out of something, you are oxidizing that compound. So by oxidizing compounds, we release electrons. So that's what e-redox O is. And for the same principle, e-redox I would be when we're feeding electrons into or to these compounds, and they're taking electrons, so they're called reduced. So now you have two different chemical reactions. One is oxidation, the other one is reduction. And I'm using, for those who are not familiar with that, as human, and we eat food, and we breathe oxygen. And so we're basically oxidizing food to get energy. We're releasing all the electrons from the food we eat to gain energy from it. So if I apply that to e-redox, that will be e-redox O. And I don't have an example for our metabolism for e-redox I, but in the world, in the real world, when we have contaminants, especially the one we want to focus on, that's a dry cleaning agent, like perchloroethylene and the trichloroethylene. These are the two main dry cleaning agents we're using. And they are more easily reduced than being oxidized. So e-redox I would be a better approach to treat these compounds. But for contaminants like oil, like benzene, for example, and they are already reduced, so they tend to be oxidized. So e-redox O would be more applicable to petroleum hydrocarbon treatment, while e-redox I would be better fit for contaminants like PCE and TCE, so those dry cleaning solvents. Next slide, please. So I'm gonna just go with the e-redox I first. So this is, as I said, this is for reductive dechlorination or degradation. And also it helps the desorption of these contaminants from soil particles into water, into groundwater. And that makes the destruction process easier, because for microbes to do degradation work, or even for chemical reactions, they tend to happen in a liquid phase, in water phase. So if you have contaminants that's absorbed to soil particles, it's going to stay there for a long time. That's why we have certain sites that's taking forever to clean up, because it's not like the approach we're taking is ineffective. It is because we have a lot of compounds, those contaminants, they're just trapped by the solids. And so the e-redox I also has some effects in disrupting that that balance and then release these contaminants into the water phase for them to be degraded. Let's go next slide, please. So this one is, basically try to show you what e-redox I, to simply put, it is basically what I define a low intensity electrical field we're setting up in the contaminated matrix. So when we're setting up, like soil and groundwater is contaminated, and then we put electrodes in there to set up this, you can see that the bottom left bottom figure is basically electrical field. So you have this electrical rays in there, and it's showing you when you have two electrodes, you have a negative positive or an anode cathode in there. So we're forming this electrical field, and then you have a bigger influenced area, and that's your contaminated zone. So we're treating it that way. And well, when we're talking about electricity, and I want to explain that this system is not really consuming a lot of electricity. One system, one set of, we basically set up this as, we call that one set. It's a unit, like a module. And it's consuming probably around 50 watts or so. So it's like a regular light bulb. It's not even a big one. We never exceeded 100 watts for one module. So the electricity consumption for the operation of this system is very minimum. And so we patented this technology, so we could better use it and also protect the IP. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we started this work in the early 2000s, and at the time the beginning of this was not even for remediation. We were trying to use this mechanism of setting up the electrical field for a remediation tool that's permeable reactive barrier, or PRB. And at the time, people are putting iron, so zero valent iron, into the ground to form a barrier. And then the groundwater, when it's passing through that, it's reduced. So the TCE and PCE, all these contaminants get reduced. And the problem for that barrier is it's a term called passivation. Basically, it's a surface oxidation. So when the groundwater passes through it, some components in the groundwater would oxidize the iron. And so it's forming a coating on top of it. And when that coating is formed, the efficiency of this barrier would be lost. And eventually, if it's completely covered, it's insulated, so it's not doing anything. So at the time, we were using electrical current to try to rejuvenate that the performance of what's called a ZVI PRB, or zero valent iron permeable reactive barrier. And from there, we noticed that this process itself can trigger direct reduction of E. And so we started in early, and there a few papers from a few other research groups looking at something similar, but from a fundamental perspective. We're using that as a applied research, and they're doing the fundamental research. And especially this concept called the microconductor, and that's by a German researcher, Dietmar Rainer from Dresden University of Technology. He published a paper in 2002, and it's not for remediation. It's basically, his study was, if I put electricity into soil, into the ground, what happens? And so he found this mechanism. He said, basically, you're turning all these conductive soil particles into numerous microconductors or capacitors. So they can be charged and they're discharged. So during that charging and discharging, the electrons movements would be achieved. And then so you're basically having this whole matrix full of electron movement. So, and that explains a lot of the field performance of the e-redox technology. So we basically have some fundamental knowledge in here to support the applied applications of that in the field. Let's go to the next slide. I have a little cartooning here. I want to show you how that works. And so this is the, all these Pac-Man in here, these are bacteria. So you see TCE, I'm using TCE here as a sample contaminant, so that's a dry cleaning agent. By the way, during the old times, TCE is okay. Like when I was a kid, I used to be told, like, if you got grease on your hand, you just use gasoline to wash it. And over here, when we used to have a lot of grease on chips, like computer chips, we use TCE to wash them. We use TCE to wash our clothes, suits, dry cleaning. And military bases, Air Force, they use TCE to wash warheads. You wash your machine gun. It's a very good degreasing compound. But unfortunately, TCE is, it's very toxic. It's an acute carcinogen. When it exceeds certain concentrations, you get cancer for sure. And the other problem is TCE is heavy. So it's heavier than water. So when you dump it to the ground, it goes down. Goes down to wherever it can stop. Usually it's the bedrock. And then, so that's the problem. Fortunately, in nature, Mother Nature always got something to take care of all these bad things. And especially the man-made compounds. So in this case, those little Pac-Man in here, different colors, these are bacteria. So they can use organic matter in soil as electron source. So they take electron source, go back to that oxidation thing. So they take electrons out of this soil, and they pass that to TCE, because TCE is a relatively oxidized compound. It tends to have this affinity to electrons. So the bacteria, they are actually breathing on TCE. So they're taking electrons from those from soil, pass that to TCE. And during the process, they're reducing TCE to these compounds called DCE, as you can see here. And also eventually it can go to ethane, and it's generating chloride, ethane and ethane. Ethane and ethane, they are harmless, but DCE is also toxic. So during the process of TCE degradation, DCE is always an issue. And so this is a natural degradation. And let's do another click. So what if we put electricity in the ground? Just click this compound, I think it's gonna move.
Probably should go down, but
It's a little slow, but yeah. So now suddenly we are putting, now this matrix is full of electrons. And as I said, the bacteria, they are using electrons from existing organic matter in soil, but that's limited. So when these organic compounds are used up, then they don't have anything to use to reduce TCE. In this case, we come in, like, Joe's, very experienced in injecting food to the soil, oil in this case, right? Joe is using oil to serve as the electron source to feed those bacteria so they can get electrons from oil and then keep dumping to TCE to reduce it. So we're helping bacteria. But e-redox is doing that in a different way. So rather than feeding them something that they have to break down and take electrons, we just feed them electrons directly. And this process, some bacteria can take the, what's called naked electrons to benefit themselves, to do the same thing. They use these electrons to do the same dechlorination by reducing TCE. Other bacteria cannot use it. But there is another pathway that Joe is going to talk about, that's the next slide, that these electrons can reduce TCE directly, not going through DCE, but it's going through a process called beta elimination. So it's going through acetylene, chloroacetylene, and then to ethene and ethane. So in that process, there's no toxic compounds to be generated. So it's actually, from that reaction, it's better than the regular bacteria dechlorination of TCE. And because of this combined process, do another click, and so we can degrade TCE much faster than the background biological process. Just keep clicking, and you're going to see acetylene to be generated, and then it's converted to ethane and ethane, and by that time, TCE is gone. So, and next slide, Joe. I'll let you explain. Those two reactions.
Next slide. This is what when we talk about the biological approach and the abiotic approach. Biological approach will create from TCE, will go to DCE, to vinyl chloride, to ethane, whereas in the abiotic route, it goes to this chloroacetylene, to acetylene, and to ethane. One of the advantages you get is sometimes cis 1,2 DCE and vinyl chloride can persist in the environment. You put in the electron donor, you get some good reactions, some TCE goes away, but now you got a cis 1,2 DCE problem. Now the cleanup objective for DCE is higher, so sometimes it's not an issue, but you avoid that going through the beta elimination. But the key to this slide is that both of these things are happening simultaneously, and the beta elimination route would occur in the subsurface if there were electrons. There just aren't any. So when we add these electrons, we make this happen, and the electrical field just enhances the biological, and it makes the beta elimination occur. So we got to probably move along here, so let's go to the next slide. I'm going to go kind of quickly because these slides are self-evident. You just look at the picture. Here's a site where we had tetrachloroethylene, dry cleaning fluid, at 100 parts per billion. In a couple of about 400 days, there was an issue there where the wires got cut, so that was off for a little while. But you can see the degradation is occurring. Let's go to the next slide. Here's another one. This is a perchlorate, and the perchlorate is a rocket fuel. It's an accelerant used a lot by the military, and this was a test out of the military site. And you can see that within 98 days, the E-redox caused the reduction of perchlorate into a great extent here. Let's go to the next one. And then here's another one. This is in Denver, Colorado. Tetrachloroethylene. This is a 1-year reduction from about 160,000 micrograms per liter, which is probably a DNAPL zone. And if you actually looked at a graph of what happened to the TCE or the PCE here, is you would have seen that it would have initially spiked because you were desorbing the compounds, and then it would be degrading and drop down, and it would continue to degrade. And this is we still are operating on this site. So let's go to the next slide. And this is just to give you some idea of the equipment. Now, this is an equipment trailer. The blue thing is a big equipment trailer with some containers of probably EVO or maybe some carbon. And those little boxes on top those are the electrical controller boxes for the E-redox. And so it's not a very complex system. And then you can see this picture of the guys putting the electrodes down the wells. And from the surface, it doesn't look like anything. It goes into existing wells. You got to run a little wire, and then you let the system run. So it's fairly simple in terms of the field application. So let's go to the next one. So I'm going to do this one here quickly, but yeah. The key here is that these are some of the field applications where we looked at Superfund sites. They looked at adhesive plants, industrial facilities, mostly chlorinated ethanes here, perchloroethylene. And it's just a good example of where we've done these things. So it's not just Colorado, they're around the world this is being applied. So next slide. And actually, before you move that slide, can we go back to that just for 1 second? Because the brown colored letters are places where you see the acetylene is detected in the analysis. And the good thing about acetylene being detected is that it's a definitive tracer for that abiotic reaction. So you could see that we were seeing that acetylene in those cases. So on to the next slide. And then one of the big problems that are, so I'm going to do this one too, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
The per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, this is an emerging technology or an emerging contaminant. It's actually going to be a big deal because these things are everywhere, and they're touted in the newspaper as forever chemicals. They never go away because they're very highly stable, and they're used in things like Gore-Tex. They're used in Teflon pans. They don't break down with heat. They're used for waterproofing and coatings. They're very tough. And so they're sticking around in the environment, and recently they've been identified as potential carcinogens. But Song has done some laboratory testing on this, and the preliminary testing is very positive with a destruction of PFAS. In the 27 days they got, we were seeing, or after 10 days of e-redox, you're seeing 49 and 30% respective destruction of the PFAS or the PFOA and the PFAS, which are two of the compounds. The PFAS compounds are made up of hundreds of different compounds, and so this is going to be something in the future. So we just wanted to put it in here to show that this is probably going to be a technology that could be used for that. So let's go to the next slide. And so this is a transition slide, and now e-redox O is the other side of the coin. So again, we'll go back to Song for that.
All right. Well, I think we just finished the e-redox I, and as I said, the I is we're feeding electrons to these compounds to degrade them. And now let's talk about the other direction. So as you might remember that in that cartoon, those Pac-Man bacteria, they're using food to generate electrons to pass to TCE. So usually they're limited in the electron source. That's why we're feeding them electrons. So electrons in that case is almost like food. So these bacteria, they're missing food. They're starving. And for the e-redox O, it's different. It's for oxidation degradation. So in this case, if I use ourselves as example, for e-redox I situation, we are missing food. So we're starving. But for e-redox O situation, we're missing oxygen. We need something for ourselves to breathe on. We have enough food, but then we can't breathe. So this is most of the cases in contaminated sites, like when it's petroleum hydrocarbon or other organic contaminants, they tend to deplete all the electron acceptors. Electron acceptors, would cover oxygen. So for human being, we have to breathe oxygen. But bacteria, they're more capable. Without oxygen, they can breathe on something else. But these things can be depleted too, like nitrate and sulfate. Sometimes when you smell this rotten egg odor, that means you don't have oxygen. That's 100%, because now some bacteria are actually breathing non-sulfate. So when they reduce sulfate, so they release hydrogen sulfide. That's why we're smelling that. But in any case, in a lot of the contaminated sites, that what to breathe on is an issue. So we try to help, and that's how e-redox O works. Next slide, please. So this is a different scenario. You see this Pac-Man, but they're different from the other one. These are different groups of bacteria. So they're also in soil, in natural soil. And what they're doing here is they're degrading like oil and all these organic matter, so they can get electrons. They pass electrons in their cells. They could get energy. And they pass the electrons to a final electron acceptor. So as I said, it's either oxygen, nitrate, sulfate. Sometimes they can even breathe on compounds themselves. That's how we make wine. Is this fermentation thing is you're using organic matter as something to breathe on, and and sometimes they can even breathe on CO2 to make methane. But anyway, all these electron acceptors can be limited. And when they're depleted, you bet that degradation will stop because these bacteria get nothing to breathe on. So what we're doing now is, as one of the remediation tools, we sometimes we pump air into the ground. It's called air sparging. It's called bioventing. It's called, another approach is we pull vacuum through the ground so the air can get in. So vapor extraction, we get the vapors out. In the meantime, we flow air through. And all these approaches are trying to give them oxygen tanks. And so what are we doing here is this is out of scale. Just want to show you how that works. So when we put the eRelax O device in, we change that situation. And click it again. And just click. Now you can see that the electrons started to move. So rather than we're delivering electron acceptors like air to the contaminated matrix, now we're pulling electrons to oxygen. So it's a reverse respiration process. So this is a game changer. By doing this, you can see two things. One, that this device, you see that center is exposed to air, so it's ambient air, which is you have unlimited amount of oxygen. So now suddenly these bacteria can breathe through this, almost like a snorkel kind of thing, and then they can breathe oxygen without really physically seeing oxygen down there. So that's one thing. Secondly, this process, we don't have to deliver anything to the ground, and to the opposite, electrons are flowing through our device, so there's no energy input. There's actually energy generation. So we're generating electricity through this process. And then if we go further than that, if we do carbon calculation or carbon balance, it's pretty obvious that this process is carbon negative because it's energy negative too. And by doing this, now we're setting this matrix to be breathable to bacteria. And so we can enhance that degradation. And click again. Because of that process, we can have sustainable remediation or destruction of contaminants. So we use this technology for petroleum hydrocarbon. So for like benzene, for toluene, and things like that. So it works great for like leaking underground storage tanks. So we have, about 24 of sites. All these are active gas stations. Next slide. And Joe, you want to go through the process of field implementation?
Yeah, just basically, this is a slide to show you how this is implemented in the field. It's pretty straightforward. You have a health and safety meeting. We do some monitoring. We're looking at existing monitoring wells here. So we look at testing those wells. You install the electrode, just slides right down the existing well, or you can make a custom well for that. For this case, you hook up the electricity and you make sure that the voltage is correct, and then you close the well up and you let it do its job. So it's pretty simple. It's a field installation. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, next slide after that. And then, in terms of installations, this is, again, some data to show you kind of how the performance is. Here's a situation where they had an operating gas station in Denver. You see the benzene concentration in September 2016 in the whole plume has dropped substantially, as well as the benzene in the source area. So it just shows that the process has been effective. The next slide is similar data. Show you this. So, the next slide. Here, we can apply it. Here you have a little line of wells that can be a source treatment area or a cutoff wall. You can use this electrical field as a cutoff fence, and we have data showing that that's worked very nicely. Here you see the overall benzene concentrations over approximately about a year and a half operation has dropped down quite substantially. So the technology is working really great. Next slide. Oh, this is one that I think, Song, you want to talk about this, but it's another application of the eRodox-O is in eutrophic lakes, and maybe you want to describe what this process was, Song.
Okay. Well, as Joe talked before, those case studies there for active gas stations, and you probably saw some wires in there. Just want to add to that. These wires are not for power. These wires are for voltage generation monitoring. So we're using that to monitor the voltage generated in our device, and so that can serve as a it's basically a monitoring for biodegradation in the ground. So this is it's another tool we kind of generated through this process. So it's a new monitoring method, and it's easier. You don't have the sampled groundwater. Just want to add to that. And for the same mechanism, this was a first pilot test. Well, it's not a pilot test. It's actually a small area, small project demonstration for sediments and water, lake, and sediments treatment for eutrophied. Is that the right word? For the lake eutrophication treatment. And so the top left picture, that's a drone picture, so it's not a toy or anything. These are real boats, and also this is about 1,500 square feet area in this pond. And this is actually a lake, and you can see that was the starting point. So even from the turbidity of it, you can see this is the water. So it's pretty typical. This is in central eastern China. And because they have a lot of lakes like this, and they want to try something that's different from dredging the sediments and changing water. Sometimes they do change water. They flush all those lakes with like river water from Yangtze River and have them flow through it. So they basically change water for the whole lake, and that's a huge project. And after a few years, it goes back to normal. I mean, normal bad situation. So you have to do it again. And so this is the implication of it, and the configuration of that is different from what we did in the gas station. So of course they are bigger, and that middle point, you can see that's, so we have a divider. So we have this treatment area, and the surrounding area would be control. And the middle one is the left part. You might see a few dark spots. These are the columns of the eRodox-O devices we put through the water column down to the sediments, about 20-30 centimeters down, and then we have the other electrode. That's the top left one, something floating on top. That's exposed to air. So it's kind of the similar mechanism, and by doing this, we're enhancing the biodegradation of organic matter in water. And after 30 days, this center picture and the one to the right, you can see the difference. So especially the center one is the outside control zone, one is the treatment zone. And those things floating on top, those are duckweed. And if you check on duckweed loves good water. Duckweed and sponge. And we saw both only in that treatment area, because they like better water quality. And outside there's nothing. And some people throw some fish in there. They live happily now. So that to the right, this is, you can, with a little bit of sunshine, you can actually see it's transparent all the way down to the bottom. This is about maybe 5, 6, 5, 7 feet deep. And the local residents in there, they said they have never seen this pond as clear as that in the treatment area. So next slide, please. It will be some numbers from our sampling. So over here, what I want to stress here is the ammonium, so NH4, and phosphorus. So these are the two main components for what's called nutrients in water treatment. Nutrient removal is actually the most challenging problem for wastewater treatment plants now. Used to be organic matter, now it's not. So with the performance in natural ponds and lakes, we're actually working on some prototype devices we want to try in the local wastewater treatment plant. And so with this device setup, we don't need to put in any energy. This is energy zero. And maybe we can apply that same principle to remove nutrients in the municipal wastewater. And this is, 1 month of treatment, we reduced ammonium nitrogen 88% and phosphorus 70%. And turbidity improvement is 94%. That's why you're seeing, basically it's clear water versus a very turbid water. So this is close to the end, this pilot, and so our collaborator, they're looking into expanding this to the whole lake, and hopefully to use this and apply that in other areas. And as I said, this one is in China right now.
Yeah.
Next slide, please.
Yeah, maybe we can move through this one and get right to the fertilizer, because I think we're going to run out of time here.
Okay.
But basically, we've gone through the e-redox. It's been applied at a lot of places. It's friendly for clay and silt technologies. It's got a lot of other opportunities to be used in the oxidative state that you saw there with sewage treatment. And it's got a really, it's very well accepted by the Colorado regulators, and we're working on regulators from other states. So the next slide will get it right to the fertilizer.
Next one, please.
Yeah, there we go. So maybe you give them the introduction for this, and I'll finish it off.
Okay. Yeah, and this is, well, our technology is basically what we've been doing remediation. So we try to distract all the contaminants into something that's harmless. Usually it's going to the end product of either CO2 or ethane or ethane, so basically to make them disappear. But we know there are a lot of waste, or, we think they're contaminants, they have value in there. So this BGF technology, it's basically a partial biodegradation or partial biochemical degradation process. We develop it to convert some very low-grade coal or waste coal to soil enhancer and organic fertilizer. And I know some audience, you understand that the organic fertilizer, majority of that right now, to my understanding, I know some of them are from biomass. You can compost it, you can ferment it, but majority of that, they're actually using animal manure as the feedstock. And so now I visited a few dairy plants in this place. This is in Inner Mongolia in China. The reason we set it up, because that's Inner Mongolia area has about 88% of the lignite deposit in China. And China is one of the major lignite producing countries. And you probably all saw pictures of Beijing under smog. And this is one of the big contributors to that, because they're burning lignite. And so it has very low heat value, but it has high particulates and high concentrations of contaminants. That's why they stopped that. But after it stopped, the economy in Inner Mongolia pretty much crashed, because they're basically relying on this resource. And so we found, well, this could be something. This is opportunity. So we found a partner in there, and we worked together and set up this plant. That's the bottom right picture is just a few reactors. These are the smaller ones. This is 1,000 metric tons, so 1,000 cubic meters. And then the bigger ones are 5,000. So we have two stages, 1,000, 5,000. 5,000 is huge. So we're doing that, and the capacity is about 500,000 tons a year. That's the single largest organic fertilizer producer in the world. And as I said, the manure-based organic fertilizer, unless you treat that aggressively, sometimes it has issues with antibiotics. Because when I visited those dairy plants in China, I don't know the practice here, but I assume some of them are similar, or chicken farms. all these animals are fed with a lot of antibiotics just for prevention. Because when one gets sick, especially for chicken farms, everybody's sick, and then they could all die together. But antibiotics, they end up in manure, and so if we use that as the material for organic fertilizer, it stays there. And then when it gets into the soil, some of them cannot be degraded; they're taken by plants. Then some animals would eat the plants, or we eat the plants, and then it get into us. So that's one thing. And then the other issues would be some other pharmaceutical intermediates in those other organic fertilizer. But the coal has this advantage because it does not have any antibiotics. But there is a potential risk for coal, it's heavy metals. And to get rid of that, we have a very stringent screening process up front. So not every coal is good. And some coal, when it contains heavy metals above organic fertilizer standard, we would not use them. And fortunately for most of the Inner Mongolia lignites, they're good. They're very low in heavy metals. Some of them are pretty high in sulfur, which makes them even a worse fuel, but it's a better feedstock for fertilizer. And so you can see those products on top of it, and it's already in the market over there. And we're just started to explore the US market with some of this, and we'll try to move the process here too to produce it, because we have a lot of lignites in this country. And I think there's a video to show the performance of this. And Joe, you got anything to add to this slide, or we just?
I was just going to say, one of the things about this is that I look at it like bread, and if I was to eat a bowl of wheat, it's not very nutritious. But if I ferment that wheat, it becomes very nutritious, and it's the foundation of civilization, really. So when you're fermenting and you're biodegrading this coal, and you're making available lots of organics, you're making available nutrients, it really works well in some of the studies that we've been looking at with mycorrhizal fungi. Love these compounds, and then when you get a better mycorrhizal, a healthy mycorrhizal fungi, you get a healthier plant. More of these compounds are being taken up, carbon nutrients are being taken up from the soil and brought into the plant. So maybe you should show them that video, because that's pretty, the video is the thing that shows how well it works, really.
Okay, so I'll load up the video. It'll take just a second. So, all right.
Yeah, and when I say about all these compounds where you're loading the video, the compounds that are being taken up, if you're got a plant that's accumulating oils like a hemp, or something that's accumulating sugars, all of these compounds are being taken up and they're being used for that purpose. Right.
So here we're looking at the results of some cultivation trials with green onions grown using the Ginatai organic fertilizer versus green onions grown with organic chicken manure. As you can see, the difference is quite obvious. With the Ginatai fertilizer, we see much thicker, stronger roots, more prolific root systems. The color is more green and healthy. And throughout the whole plant and in the entire crop, we see no rust spots on the green onion plants. Also, both of these are planted at the same time, so you can see the growth rate using Ginatai organic fertilizer is significantly higher. So we're very excited to introduce Ginatai organic fertilizer into all of our plantings.
Okay, so I'll give the screen back to Reeb.
Yeah, let's go back to the last slide. We probably got about
there's a picture. That guy, that's David Heaven. That's my friend. He's in Boulder right now. He has a business in Beijing. He's doing the tree cultivation. Go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So this picture to the left Let me see. I just got those names. It's mountain Chinese mountain peach. Um, that's the tree in here. And actually, this is from David's greenhouse in Beijing. So he used the fertilizer, that BGF product. You saw that Jinate, that's the Chinese brand. And over here, we call that Gynate or Gynate. And you see these two pots, one is like half the height of the other. They were planted at the same time, and it's in his greenhouse. So he did the test before he got more fertilizer, and so now he's using this for he's actually packaging that with the tree seedlings, and that's basically his business.
Yeah. So we probably should move it along to the question period, because I think we're probably over time a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Guys, it's been awesome. Don't worry about that. This is Wayne. I actually go to webinar, played this little game with me again, and about 5 minutes ago it booted me. So that's probably why you don't see my webcam up there. I am still on the phone. I saw lots of questions. I remember some of them. And Mark, you're going to have to help here because I'm not able to get my screen back up with all the questions on them. But I'm going to start out with one,
okay,
which is pretty broad, which is there any downside with either O redox or I redox? Meaning, are there those side effects, like you always hear about in all the pharmaceutical commercials, that you have to be aware of in certain circumstances? Or is it just a matter of an on-off switch? It either works or it doesn't. And as you know, that's very specific to my project that you guys are hopefully going to be working on, where we don't want to cause the worst situation ever, but anything we can do to cause a better situation is going to be welcome.
Yeah, and I think that what it really comes down to is about the heterogeneity of an aquifer might cause this technology to not work as well as it could. If you're in a nice clay and it's a really even clay, it's going to work great. Just like if you were using vapor extraction or air sparging, it would work great in a sandy aquifer, but it wouldn't work well in a heterogeneity. I'm having a hard time with that word. Get that out there. But so if the aquifer conditions don't allow for this technology to do what it does, then you have a little issue. But there aren't any byproducts or any kind of you're not going to exacerbate the situation. When you desorb, for example, in your situation, if we desorb TCE from the aquifer matrix, it's going to move towards your pump and treat system anyway. It's going to make the pump and treat system more effective. And the idea might be to take this and to put a series of this in and drive it towards the pump and treat system to make the synergy of the two technologies work well. But the bottom line is that there's nothing negative other than the fact that just like every other technology, it has its limitations. And if you're in a big cobble zone, you might not be able to get the electrical conductivity that you can get in a tighter formation.
Right, and that's what I thought was the case. So again, for any regulator listening to this, you can't make things worse. It just may not make them better. So you do have a cost factor, but you are not going to ever have to answer to the public and saying, oh, we tried this method and it actually, sorry, but it made things a lot worse in this aquifer. That's not going to ever be the case. So I can think of a couple of the other questions that I saw. I think Nathan asked this one and he had to leave, but he said, can it work on a creosote contaminated situation?
That's a good question. We have never tried it. And creosote, of course, is much tougher than the lighter end of petroleum hydrocarbon. Let me say it this way: if creosote, if the site can have the data, if it has data to show that the creosote is naturally degraded or is biologically degraded, then this process can make it faster.
Okay. Here's one, I think, from Scott. And Mark, you're going to help me with the questions here because I'm running out of the ones that I remember in just a minute. But Scott asked, could you repeat again how the I process works? Just summarize it quickly, Song. You were in the middle of doing the O process, and I think he wanted to just understand again the I process. Just describe it quickly.
Okay, well, I guess in short, I would be good for dry cleaning solvents, and it's for other processes that would require reductive degradation. So if I use compounds, would be chlorinated compounds, fluorinated compounds, and nitrates. What else? Perchlorate, anything like that. Any compounds that can be that's relatively easier to be reduced, then I would be applicable better.
Okay. One more I remember, and that was, and you did mention this, Joe did. He said that you could plug these systems, the electrical side of them, into a wall outlet. Am I accurate that the voltage needed is relatively low in the 110 volt range? It's not like this is a 10,000 volt system. And that the question was raised from a safety perspective.
Yes, you are correct. It's very low voltage. And like Song said, it might be the electrical equivalent of a light bulb and for one of those pairs, right? So if you have 10 pairs, it's 10 light bulbs. But for example, that perchlorate system that was tested out in the desert, was a military testing. That was they brought little solar panels out there and hooked the system up to solar panels and generated electricity from the sun. So there's, again, it's that kind of electrical power. If you go up the scale, you could go to electric kinetics where you up the voltage. And now you're trying to get things to move in the subsurface electrically. If you bring it up a little higher, you would go to, really what I forget what the technology's called, but you're even
thermal, right? Thermal desorption.
Yeah, thermal desorption using electricity because now the electrical power is so high that it's causing heat. It's not like that. It's at the very low end of the range of electrical power. Just really. It's just enough, from my perspective, it's enough to make it what I call an electron soup. And once the electron soup is there, all of these reactions are occurring, both biological and abiotic. And so you're just facilitating that with a lot of free electrons in the system.
I thought of one other one that I saw. I asked, will it imperil or create a mortality situation with fungi that it interacts with?
Are you referring to the fertilizer, or?
No, the redox I process. He was asking it during your description of how it enhances bacteria, but he was wondering whether it killed fungi.
No, it wouldn't. That electrical current wouldn't be high enough to kill anything. It's more.
That was what I thought your answer would be. He was actually expressing that it would be quite negative if it killed the fungal activity in the soil, in the groundwater or soil.
I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't think so either. Joe, one for you from me, and then Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you for other questions that were out there. I know Scott had several others. Aaron had one, so if you look back for those. But here's mine. You talked a little bit about this, I think, but what about when you combine this, Joe, with other biological. So, injection. So let's say you're applying the redox either concurrent with or following the injection of some kind of a biological enhancer from a remedial perspective. So adding, something, a sugar type substance ahead of the redox. Is that
typically
a good process?
You're going to add some sort of electron donor, like a sugar or oil or something like that. So the bacteria, like Song said, it's their food. They're chewing it up. They're getting electrons. They're using the electrons for energy, and then they're dumping the electron onto TCE molecule, which is causing a chloride to pop off, right? And the hydrogen to pop on that molecule. So you're actually dechlorinating it's part of the process of the bacteria eating. They're dechlorinating the compounds. They can also use the electrons that are these free electrons in the electron soup. They're also going to use those because they're available in bacteria. So I would expect that you probably would enhance the bacterial aspect of it. And at the same time, you're having the abiotic reactions occur. So if you think I can get a certain rate of reaction for degradation using just injection of oil or injection of an electron acceptor, if I put electricity in the system, now it's probably double or more in terms of the rate of reaction because I've got that electron soup and now I've freed it up. And if you think about the natural environment, when we look at natural attenuation is just happening naturally. And so these reactions are happening very slow, and natural attenuation might take a long time. If we wanted to enhance natural attenuation, you might add the oil or you might add some microorganisms. But here's the situation is that the natural attenuation is slow because there isn't enough electrons. And the electrical program or the electrical process here just adds electrons to the system and overcomes that barrier.
Okay, awesome. All right, Mark, why don't you get to the questions that some of the audience had? And if anybody wants to raise their hand, and Mark, if you want to unmute them, they can ask them live. Otherwise, you just read from the off. I have a couple more on my own, but I'll wait till the end for mine.
Rib, do you want to get it?
Yes, go for it.
One sec. Let me just do one thing and see if you guys can see it. Can you see the questions now?
Might have to put my glasses on.
On the screen?
No, Arif, let's not do that. That's really hard.
Okay.
Don't do that, please. That's not the way to do it.
Okay. Okay, I will read them. So this one is from Aaron, and that is, could you please explain the last slide with the graphene?
Oh yeah, the graphene we didn't get to.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the graphene, that's kind of that's a popular material during I would say the past decade or so, and especially after that University of Manchester professor got the Nobel Prize for using Scotch tape to peel off a graphite to obtain graphene. It's kind of a miracle material. So now I think the well accepted definition of graphene is if you have fewer than 10, some people saying fewer than 30 layers of graphite sheets, then it's graphene. So graphene is basically just absolute graphene is just one layer of carbon. And so it's called a two-dimensional material. And because of that structure, it is it has a very high conductivity, and also it's very flexible. So, but unfortunately now the method to produce this material it's pretty aggressive, if that's the right word to use, because for example, the common method they're using is using strong acid and high temperature and under pressure to treat graphite. And even from my description, you can think it is pretty expensive and sometimes dangerous. And also now they have this vapor phase like deposit, so basically deposit carbon atoms on the surface of something. And so just a few methods available, but they're all expensive. So now if you're going to the graphene, there's not a big market for this material yet because of that. But the price range we could find is over $1,000 per gram. And even now, there a few claims from a few manufacturers in China. They said they can produce a few, maybe 10, 20 tons, metric tons of graphene at like $1 a pound. But I personally, I don't believe that. I think that just from the method they're using, they're basically using an industrial sized blender to cut the graphene into very fine powder. So what's claimed as graphene is actually just very fine graphite. And so of course it's cheap. But if you go to the international market, thousands of dollars per gram is what we're looking at. And because of that, it limits its application. And what we're talking about here, this is an early stage technology, but it's the only one that's producing graphene or graphene oxide, which is a precursor for graphene, under normal condition. So there's no high pressure, it's normal temperature, and we are using a combination of microbiology of microbes with electrochemistry in the reactor to produce this. And the cost we estimated from the process is, it's probably, we're talking about maybe $20 a gram or a kilogram, something in that range. So it's orders of magnitudes cheaper than any other technologies. But it's still early stage, and we just have the IP package completed. So we have a U.S. patent that's going to be out in any time. It's we already got the approval, and we have a Chinese patent. We also filed a Canadian patent that's probably going to go with the U.S. one, and we have an Australian and a EU filing. So it's basically to protect this IP. But in terms of the technology, it's still in the early stage. So I wouldn't be able to talk too much about it. Other than this is a brand new method.
Okay, shall I
All
go
right,
to the next
Terry,
one?
why don't you go to the next one?
Okay, this one is from Terry, and he says, when using genate, I guess, is the nutrient density in the onions better than or not as good as the other onion, or perhaps no difference?
That's a good question. I don't think we have done a nutritional analysis of the product. Rather, we were, but not on onion. But I do have data on potato. I just didn't have time to present that. And for potato, that area, it's actually one of they produce about half of the potato in China. So in that area, Inner Mongolia, a certain section of it, and by using the fertilizer, they increase the yield from 10 to 30%. And what's more impressive is in that area, they have never seen any consecutive cultivation for 2 seasons. But for that specific field, they already, at the right moment, they're already doing the 5th. So it's a 5 cycles of production consecutively, nonstop. And usually you would have seen a lot of problems after the second planting because, a lot of diseases and the yield would decrease. But, opposite to that, they're actually seeing increased yield. And then did the starch analysis and taste and, actually got more starch. I don't know if it's due to the more biomass or it's at least the bottom line, it's not worse than those crops, those potato not using it. Actually, they also use that for apple planting, apple trees, and that changed the whole thing. That, for the first time, we saw this antioxidation effect in those apple They can be stored for a very long time. Actually, I just saw some pictures sent from a university. We sent that to Peking University. The professor put that on top of his desk. It's like 13 months. It didn't rot. It's dry, but it's good. And then they cut it open. In 144 hours, it stayed pretty much that browning didn't happen. So they're still looking at what caused that and what kind of compounds was triggered in apple, and it tastes really good. I tasted that myself.
Awesome. Next one, I want to keep rolling here. We have gone an hour and a half. I want to, thank you everybody for hanging around, and most of the people that were on are still here. I really want you to let's put a couple more, and if we haven't answered them here, we could do one of two things. We might ask these guys to come back another time, which is my preference, but we'll figure that one out. Or we'll make sure we do ask them the questions, and we'll get those answers out to all of you that have been on the webinar, either directly or by adding it to the replay. Remember, within a couple of days, sometimes it's even as early as tomorrow, Mark will have the replay of this up and available, and you'll be notified of that. Why don't you go with the next one, or you have a couple more questions?
Yes, this one is from Nathan, and he says, has this been tested on creosote brown soils?
I already asked that one. I already got that one. So,
and what about Aaron? How large is the electrical field in a clay substrate or sand substrate, for example?
Yeah, that's a great one. I was going to ask it similar to that. That's a very good question. In other words, what's the zone of impact, really, distance-wise, Joe, from where,
I think
where
that
it's used?
you got about, in a clay, you probably have about a 50-foot, those electrodes would be 50 feet apart, about maximum, and then the electrical field extends out beyond that. So the whole field itself might be, 70, 80 feet, and then it'll have a round shape. The good thing is that if you take a long electrode, so if you have a deeper aquifer, the longer the electrode, you can now extend it not only in the horizontal zone, but also in the vertical. And so you have a large area that can be covered by two wells. But it is, again, one of the limitations of the technology is if you have a very large area, you're going to need more electrical. And in that case, maybe you're using it more as an electrical fence, so that instead of trying to treat a very large area, you set it up in a way that you have an electrical field that the compounds have to flow through as they move down gradient.
Or in the case of our site in Vandalia, Joe, where we've created the fence long ago with the existing pump and treat, and we're actually contracting the fence really slowly, and we know where that is very well. If we put these the field in the path of the movement of the groundwater through the existing pump and treat, as you said, we could be having a faster effect of that, in this case, air stripping system, than without the field being in place.
Right. You can enhance the degradation along in situ before it gets there. And I think in case of Vandalia, one of the ideas that I'm most interested in is that source area is so contaminated that and there's so much mass there that we would like to take advantage of the desorption component of this and try to desorb it and push it towards your existing system and pull it out that way.
Yep. And in this case of this site, it is very easily reached because of the number of wells we already have in that area, and it's inside of a very secure fenced area that we have control over, so we can put electrical, everything we need to make the system work well. So next question, Reed. I don't want to focus too much on that.
Wow.
Okay, all the others are from Scott. He asked a lot of questions. So this one I will just go by. So it appears this one is from Scott. So it appears that this is operating similar to a microbial fuel cell.
Yes, yeah.
That's a good one. That's related to your O process.
Yeah,
Tom.
that's the whole process.
I thought
Yes.
he made a great comment.
It actually, I just want to go back a little bit. That's as I said, that whole area, the subject, started in mid-90s by a Korean professor, and then Penn State, Dr. Bruce Logan, professor there, he pretty much built this whole science of that. But at the time, the whole objective for that science is to harvest all the electrons generated from contaminants degradation to generate power. So a lot of work has been done to maximize the efficiency of the system, and so they can pull the more power together and to make use of it. And we started in maybe 2001 or so it's not, probably soon after Penn State. But our focus was on remediation. And I had, right before we started the project, was supported by a DOE grant at the time. I actually visited Dr. Logan in Penn State and had a conversation. I said, this is my plan. I'm not going to compete with yourself, unfortunately, of course you're doing fundamental research and even my direction is different. I just want to see his take on my thinking of using this technology to expedite the electron flow to enhance biodegradation of contaminants. And he supported that. He said, I think it's a great idea. Actually, later on, we worked on the same project funded by Chevron by using this concept for enhanced remediation. So now I think even his lab is doing a lot of remediation work, and you can see a lot of papers published in that on the same topic. But I'm proud that I'm probably one of the first guys doing this on this direction.
So let's call it quits. We've gone for an hour and 40 minutes, and again, I could keep asking questions for the next day, but let's do this. We'll confer with Joe and Song, audience, this is for you, and see how the best way is to handle this. But I'm going to make a suggestion for the two of them to think about, which is, let's pick a date when it works for you both and for me. And here in COVID land, we do have a little bit more time flexibility. And let's just do a Q&A session. And we'll have your slides available, so if you need to refer to any of them, they would be there, and I'll help manage those, and Arif can. But if you don't mind, let's just think about it, because I think we could easily get an hour that would just be Q&A for the folks that would have it. Scott, as you mentioned, had just tons of questions, and he's probably still going to have those. So anyway, we'll talk more about it, but think about that a little. So everybody, thank you for hanging out. Most importantly, I usually thank the audience most, but today I'm going to thank Joe and Song and Arif and Mark, because they did an amazing job. Arif, thank you for the way you got through the slides. And then Joe and Song, very, very cogent and excellent presentation. Lots there for us to think about. This isn't just bioremediation, folks, or remediation. Again, think about it. The largest plant in the world producing organic fertilizer. Think about that. That's pretty amazing. So, guys, thanks. Just last comments from each of you before we go off. And then think about this. What can we all do to help you? What can make your technical programs more widespread, because they need to be. So, think about that. Maybe if you have a quick comment, each of you, about that. So parting thoughts, and then a quick answer to the question, what can we all do to help?
Yeah, I'll start with that, but I think parting thought is that for us, we just need to get people to know that these technologies exist and start using them as alternatives, and start looking at them as an alternative. And I think there's almost an unlimited application of just the things we talked about today, so that there's great markets out there that we should get these things out there to use it. And, I think what people can do is you see on the screen is our contact information. What I think people can do is contact us if you have a question, or if you think you have an application, give us a call, and we can talk about it, and we can see what it might be. And from my perspective, I've got 40 years worth of doing mostly groundwater remediation and soil remediation. So I can talk, and this is a very important technology, but maybe not the only one, and maybe it's a combination of technologies. But I think that the best thing people can do is if they think they have something, give us a buzz. Song?
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, I want to thank Wayne and Reeve and Mark for inviting us, and Joel too. For putting this together. And I think Joey already said. I think that we have a lot of potentials for using these technologies on both remediation and even ag market. And I think it's a great idea for Wayne's proposal. We do another Q&A session if it's of interest to the audience. We'd be glad to do that so we can discuss more. And I do have a lot of thoughts on, remediation side is more straightforward, but for the agriculture use for the fertilizer, I think, there are a lot of opportunities too, even for the sustainability part. And we never even tap into that. And you think about it now, without burning this coal and how much carbon we are trapped in an organic way, rather than just shooting that to the ground and waiting for a day it's going to leak out in an earthquake or something. We're making use of it and to grow more crops, and by improving soil quality and by growing more biomass that can take more CO2 into from the atmosphere. I think that aspect we just didn't have time to discuss, but I'd really like to explore that. And I think Wayne, this organization is a great platform, with all the members in here, all the people who participated in the webinar. And as Joe said, we got our contacts in here. Another Q&A session, or just individual Q&A will be fine too.
All right. And by the way, you were right. You were close when you were talking, because the other application that I'd love to talk more about is eutrophication. Huge issue on a worldwide basis. And you don't have to solve it entirely. If you do anything to remove nitrogen and phosphorus, which you're saying, especially if it can be done without an energy input of a great amount, that's huge. And the word is eutrophy, is what, you were trying to look so eutrophication is the word used, and then eutrophy is what you say when it gets worse. So anyway, guys, thanks so much. Mark, thank you. Areed, thanks. Why don't you take us out, Mark? Audience, thank you. And we will see you tomorrow. Hopefully some of you, we have a Q&A section just broadly about all the things we talk about. I think at about noon or 12:30 Mountain Time tomorrow.